Okay, so you've sent us a fascinating stack of research about Bitcoin, wanting to dive into its potential consequences, especially its future as an investment. We've got excerpts from a dense economic paper, news articles about political campaigns, and even glimpses into the beliefs of Bitcoin enthusiasts. Let's unpack this, shall we? It seems like you're interested in going beyond the usual hype and really understanding the potential long-term impact of widespread Bitcoin adoption, particularly if its price continues to climb as its proponents predict.
What's fascinating is you're really trying to look past the hype to understand what a Bitcoin positive future, where the price keeps going up like its proponents are predicting, what that might actually mean.
Right. So we're going to examine those arguments about Bitcoin's actual usefulness, whether it can truly be considered a valuable asset, and what this Bitcoin positive future might mean for everyday people like our listeners.
Right. And you even sent some stuff about how Bitcoin could be quietly shaping the 2024 U.S. election, with potentially some unexpected winners and losers.
Yeah, and to really understand all of this, we kind of have to go back to, Bitcoin's origin story. So Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's mysterious creator, right, envisioned it as this, revolutionary payment system, this decentralized way to make transactions online, without those pesky banks.
Right. He was concerned with relying on those traditional financial institutions to handle, electronic payments, transactions, making them vulnerable to fraud, disputes, high fees. Bitcoin was supposed to be this trustless system secured by, cryptography and a distributed network, making these transactions faster, cheaper, and more secure.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty good, but then, the economists we're looking at, they paint a bit of a different picture, right?
Yeah.
They're saying that Bitcoin's design, it actually has some major flaws, and it makes it really impractical for handling everyday transactions.
Yeah, they're arguing that in reality, these Bitcoin transactions are actually pretty cumbersome and slow, and frankly, they're still pretty expensive.
Yeah, and imagine, trying to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. You'd be waiting longer than it takes to brew, right?
Yeah, and then on top of that, then you've got, the fees might actually cost you more than the coffee itself.
And then there's that infamous, volatility, right? Imagine trying to budget when the price of your morning coffee could swing, wildly, in a matter of minutes.
It really makes you wonder, right? Did Nakamoto ever really even envision people using this for, daily purchases?
That's true.
Especially when you think about, those, friend and family payments on platforms like PayPal. They're already essentially free and don't involve, some middleman that's mediating disputes.
Bitcoin is trying to solve a problem that's already been solved, maybe. So if it's not really useful for, its intended purpose, what's actually driving its price then? This is where I think we start to shift from, Bitcoin as revolutionary technology to Bitcoin as a purely investment-driven asset.
Yeah, and a pretty volatile one at that, right? I mean, remember the surge to almost $69,000 back in 2021? And then that was followed by, that pretty major crash in 2022.
Yeah, what a wild ride, right? But here's where it gets even wilder. So despite all of that volatility, right, we've got these major financial players. They're actually incredibly bullish on Bitcoin's future. And they're even starting to compare it to gold as a store of value.
Yeah, like Larry Fink.
Yeah.
The CEO of BlackRock basically came out and said that Bitcoin's appeal is really in its ability to act as a hedge against, geopolitical and economic uncertainty, much like, gold has for centuries.
And then on top of that, you've got, Cathie Wood. She's out there predicting Bitcoin could hit $1 million by 2030.
Right.
$1 million for one Bitcoin.
That's
some serious confidence.
Yeah, that's some serious confidence. And it's important to note, right, their optimism, it's not really rooted in, its functionality as a currency, right? It's about, they're focusing on its potential as a scarce digital asset, believing that, that limited supply coupled with, increasing demand, that's what will inevitably drive up the price.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin, so to speak. But then, we've also got these economists. They're arguing that Bitcoin's value is essentially a shared illusion, right? a belief equilibrium.
Right.
Driven by like hype and speculation with no real economic basis.
Which is really, that's the heart of the debate, right? Is this the future of finance, or is this just like a house of cards built on blind faith?
That's the million-dollar question, or should I say the million Bitcoin question?
Right, and it's a question with some pretty huge implications because, if those economists are right and this is indeed a bubble, it's at some point it's going to burst, right?
Which could have some pretty rough consequences for anybody that, bought into the game late in the game.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to look at now. What a Bitcoin positive future where that price continues to rise, what that might actually look like.
And who wins and who loses, right?
Exactly, because, and here's the thing, so this economic paper, it argues that even if Bitcoin's price just keeps climbing, it doesn't magically create more wealth for everybody.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
But I keep hearing about all these, Bitcoin millionaires.
Right. And that's part of the problem. So the paper calls this redistribution. And they're saying it's not just about, some people getting rich while others, miss out on the profits. It's actually about a fundamental shift in purchasing power from those who haven't invested in Bitcoin to those who, got in early. Yeah. Those early adopters, they're the ones that really stand to gain the most. And the paper actually gives some concrete numbers to illustrate just how massive this potential wealth transfer could really be.
Okay, so walk me through this. So we've got Cathie Wood, right? She's predicting Bitcoin reaching $1 million per coin. What kind of market cap are we even talking about then?
Well, so with a limited supply of 21 million Bitcoins, that would put the market cap, we're talking in the tens of trillions of dollars.
Tens of trillions. For just comparison's sake, what's the total global equity market valued at right now?
It's around $111 trillion. And gold, the market value of all the gold in the world is only about $12 trillion.
So even if Bitcoin only captures, just a fraction of either of those markets, we're still talking about just this colossal redistribution of wealth.
Yeah. And you might be surprised to learn that this transfer, it doesn't necessarily happen in some overt, obvious way. It's much more subtle than that.
So it's not like everybody, who doesn't own Bitcoin is suddenly handing over their savings.
No, not at all. Think of it this way. So as more people buy into this idea of, Bitcoin being this valuable asset, its price goes up, right? So early adopters, those that, bought in when it was cheap, they see their holdings skyrocket in value. So now they've got more wealth to either spend or invest, which in turn, that drives up the demand in the real economy for things like, houses, cars, luxury goods.
Okay, so they're cashing in their Bitcoin, buying up assets, and that kind of increases the wealth gap. Is that what you're saying?
In a way, yeah. But it's also about the rising cost of living for everyone else. So as that demand for goods and services increases, prices go up, right? So those that don't own Bitcoin, now they see their purchasing power slowly eroded because their wages and savings aren't keeping pace with this sort of Bitcoin-driven inflation.
So it's kind of like a double whammy for those latecomers to the Bitcoin game. They missed out on that initial price surge, and now they're facing a higher cost of living because of it.
Precisely. And this brings us to, I think, a really crucial point. Bitcoin, unlike, traditional investments, it doesn't represent an increase in actual productivity.
Okay.
So when you invest in a company, for example, you're betting on its ability to, create new products or services that benefit society, that generate profits. Those profits, in turn, they can lead to higher wages, economic growth. Bitcoin doesn't really work that way.
So it's more like a zero-sum game then, right?
Yeah.
Where someone's gain is inherently tied to someone else's loss.
Exactly. And that's where, the potential for social unrest, that really comes in. Imagine a world where, a small percentage of the population, these early Bitcoin adopters, control a disproportionate amount of, the world's wealth simply because they got lucky with an investment.
It would be like the ultimate I told you so moment, but on a global scale. And we're not talking about a gradual shift in wealth here either.
Yeah. If Bitcoin's price continues on this trajectory, we're talking about a rapid and dramatic transfer of wealth with, potentially huge consequences for social stability.
And that's not even considering, how this might play out in this upcoming election. Which, speaking of, okay, so let's talk about this Bitcoin election connection. What happens when we throw Bitcoin into this whole political arena?
Well, you have to keep in mind that Bitcoin's value, incredibly sensitive to government regulation.
Which makes sense. I mean, it's a decentralized currency, but its whole existence really depends on governments, choosing to actually allow it.
Exactly. And with so much potential wealth, at stake, the crypto industry, they're not just sitting on the sidelines. They're pouring a ton of money into these lobbying efforts, trying to, influence politicians and shape those regulations in their favor.
So are we talking like your typical corporate lobbying here, or is this something like a little bit different?
Oh, it's definitely a lot more interesting than that. So we actually found data from Public Citizen, and they're saying that crypto companies, they've already pumped a staggering $119 million into political campaigns just this election cycle.
Wow. That's almost half of like all corporate election spending. So they're clearly taking this very seriously.
Oh, yeah. And get this, they're not just like donating to candidates who openly support Bitcoin. A lot of these funds, they're actually being used for like negative advertising, trying to kind of discredit candidates who they see as like crypto skeptical.
Right. So they're really playing in the long game here, trying to create this like more crypto-friendly environment regardless of who wins.
Yeah, that seems to be the strategy. Now, on the candidate side, we've got former President Trump. He's gone from like crypto critic to, crypto cheerleader pretty remarkably quick.
It's true. Yeah, those statements that he made at, Bitcoin 2024 conference, they were pretty wild. He basically like promised to make America this Bitcoin superpower. He even said that he would create a strategic national Bitcoin stockpile if he's elected. Hold on, a strategic national Bitcoin stockpile. So like Fort Knox, but for digital gold.
It's a pretty bold claim, that's for sure. And he's not stopping there. He's also promising like concrete policies like making Bitcoin exempt from capital gains tax.
Which, let's be honest, that's a pretty tempting offer for potential voters,
Yeah.
especially the ones who are already, invested in Bitcoin.
Oh, absolutely. And then on the other side of the aisle, you've got, Vice President Harris and kind of the Democratic Party. Their stance on crypto is maybe a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, it seems like they're kind of walking this tightrope a little bit between, these calls for stricter regulation and then also this desire to be seen as like supporting innovation.
Right. The Biden administration has generally taken like a much more cautious approach to crypto, really focusing on things like, consumer protection and preventing financial instability. But with this election heating up and the crypto lobby, flexing its muscles, we have seen a little bit of a shift towards a more, I guess, crypto-friendly tone coming from the Democrats.
So both parties, in their own way,
Yeah.
are starting to recognize the growing influence of this, like crypto vote.
Mm-hmm.
But, with only a small percentage of Americans actually holding Bitcoin right now, like how much of an impact can this really have on the election?
That's a great question. I mean, on the surface, right, it might seem like a very niche issue. But remember those campaign contributions that we talked about? That money can have an outsized impact, especially, in any race that's going to be close. And don't underestimate the power of those single issue voters. So, if crypto regulations become that deciding factor for even like a small but significant portion of the electorate, it could absolutely tip the scales.
So even if, like, I'm not personally invested in Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency, this election could still have like a big impact on my life, depending on, who wins and how they choose to like handle this whole, increasingly influential digital asset.
Precisely. And that's something I really want you to think about as you, continue your research and everything. We've explored, Bitcoin's, I guess, kind of unstable foundation as this payment system, its potential for like this massive wealth redistribution. And of course, its surprising role in, this election. But the biggest question still remains. Will Bitcoin become this, mainstream investment, embraced by governments and, really integrated into our financial system? Or will it just be relegated to kind of the fringes, just a speculative asset for, the risk takers and the early adopters? And the answer might very well depend on the outcome of this election.
Wow, we covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but it's clear that Bitcoin is so much more than just, digital currency. It's this like social, economic, and now, political force that has the potential to, completely reshape our world in some very profound ways.
As you continue to, learn and explore this topic, just think about this. If Bitcoin's value is ultimately driven by, belief, what happens when that belief falters? And what does it say about, us that we're willing to kind of gamble on, such an uncertain future?
This has been a fascinating deep dive. And as always, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts on Bitcoin's potential impact, your hopes and concerns. Let us know this deep dive has changed your perspective. And until next time, keep learning and stay curious, everyone.